Campaigning for the presidential race has started in the Philippines this week, and the main candidates to replace outgoing President Rodrigo Duterte include everyone from a boxing legend to the son of the former dictator. And Duterte's daughter is also running for vice president. It's going to be a wild election season. Voters go to the polls on May 9th.
6 years from the last presidential election cycle, the 3-month-long campaign season has arrived. The main event is that race for president and separately elected vice president. And while a world-renowned boxer is in the mix, the guy drawing the crowds of a rock star is a politician, Ferdinand Marcos. If that name rings a bell, it should. Marcos is the son and namesake of the Philippines' former dictator, who toppled a stable democratic government in 1972 and imposed martial law. Ferdinand Jr. is known as Bong Bong and finds much support from younger people born after Ferdinand Sr.'s dictatorship. There is no Filipino who's not in need of help, which is why we all need to come together. Standing at the side of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., another big name in Filipino politics, Sara Duterte, a vice presidential candidate who is the daughter of the present president, often critical of her father while backing Marcos.
The kind of experience we need, not only to sustain the growth and development spurred by the current administration, but also to bring a more prosperous future.
Running a distant second in the race for president is the current vice president, but also opposition leader Lenny Robredo, the only female candidate for president after becoming one of Rodrigo Duterte's staunchest critics. Nothing can match our combined strength. So let's go and win this. If winning on physical strength mattered, former boxer Manny Pacquiao would be the clear frontrunner. A national sporting hero, he is much loved for coming from humble beginnings to reign as world champion before turning to politics to become a congressman, then senator. It's not my fight alone, but the fight of every Filipino. The Philippine economy will be a focus in the campaign, an economy hit hard by the pandemic. Corruption in public office is another topic of interest, and China's military presence in the waters separating it and the Philippines. But those issues may well take a back seat to personalities in the next 3 months and political dynasties.
Joining us is Manila-based journalist J.C. Gotinga. J.C., I want you to explain what might be difficult for many of us outside the country to understand. The Marcos name can't possibly be a good association. Are we missing something here?
Right, great question, Melissa. You know what? It has to be understood this way. Ever since the Marcoses were ousted from power in 1986, they have not stopped trying to reinstate themselves. So this has been a long coming process of them trying to slowly find their way back into the Philippine scene, first through their hometown of Ilocos Norte in the north of the country, and then slowly back into national politics. Now, why the name suddenly seems to be not as pariah as it used to be? Well, it's a mixture of, number one, the narrative has not been so well ingrained among Filipinos as we might have expected. That the fact that the Ferdinand Marcos Sr., the progenitor, the former dictator, holds the Guinness World Record for the greatest robbery of a government in the world. That's not very clear to many Filipinos, apparently. And then the machinery of the Marcoses, especially with the help of social media, they have just seeded their narrative at first subtly, but then now very, very blatantly, trying to whitewash their family's reputation, putting into question facts such as the thousands of atrocities during the Marcos regime in the 1970s and 80s, as well as the fact that they still have billions of pesos worth of money from the government coffers that they have yet to return, supposedly.
That's fascinating. And then we have Sara Duterte as the sidekick to Marcos Jr., the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte. What does she bring in all this?
Well, the Duterte name remains very popular, and definitely what she brings to Marcos is a sense of legitimacy. If we recall in 2016, when Marcos ran for vice president, he was running in tandem with Miriam Defensor Santiago. She has since passed away, but she's a very credible, very highly respected politician, and it was a surprise that she ran in partner with Marcos. But then many observers here say that it has helped Marcos very much in that it changed many Filipinos' perception of him, that, oh, suddenly the Marcoses are okay. Maybe the Marcos weren't as bad as they were framed up to be. Also, it did not help that in the post-Marcos years, many politicians, many presidents turned out to be a disappointment. So that played into it as well.
And can we back up a bit? Because I'm curious, Duterte has operated like such an autocrat. Did he try to change the laws to hold on to power and it just didn't work out, or what? Because it's surprising there's a democratic process here. I think there were a lot of expectations he tried to stay on.
Yes, he did. In the earlier half of his term, he tried to initiate a change, an amendment to the Constitution under the guise of, improving the economic provisions. But mostly people were worried that it was to remove the term limits to allow himself to run for re-election. That did not work out because the Senate stamped out the effort early on. So now we see his daughter, Sara Duterte, running for vice president. She had been expected to run for president, but given the alliance with the Marcoses, it wouldn't have looked well if she, Sara Duterte, and Bongbong Marcos Jr., both ran for president. They might have divided the support base.
Right.
But yes, Duterte did make attempts to try and stay longer.
Now, we've been talking about the fascinating personalities. Let's also talk about the issues. What do voters want?
Right. You know what? Filipinos, for many, many Filipinos, it's really a matter of daily survival, which is why concepts such as democracy and human rights and political freedoms often don't figure in their list of concerns when they head to the vote. For them, it's about how to put food on the table. How can they make sure that if anyone in the family gets sick, that they have the money, they have access to medicines and healthcare, which for many Filipinos is a problem. The pandemic has shown that our healthcare system is nearly non-existent and very, very, it's not enough. So because it is mostly a question of personal survival, it also makes it easier for people in power,
right,
for politicians to, for the lack of a better term, buy their support from the masses.
JC Katinga, thank you so much for joining us as always.